The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Ever since Donald Trump and the Republican tax plan was passed, we have been speculating, but also reporting on who is actually going to have lower tax liability in 2018 for the 2018 tax year for which we are now starting to file taxes. Who's going to pay more taxes? Because the tax cuts as they are being billed are mostly for corporations and for rich people. And middle class Americans are actually going to be sort of split in terms of whether they pay more or less in taxes for this current tax year that we are, or the current year for which we are paying, which is 2018. And even if in the short term, a lot of those middle class Americans have a slight reduction in how much they pay in taxes, much of what impacts the middle class in the bill is only temporary compared to the permanent tax cuts for corporations and for rich people. So there's sort of a few different ways in which middle income people could benefit from a tax cut plan, if indeed it is real. So number one is you might just get what we would call like a straight up tax cut. At the end of the year, accounting for your withholdings and your refund, your total tax paid goes down. That would be a tax cut. There are other ways in which middle income people might benefit. If you believe in trickle down economics, you would believe that by giving corporations and rich people a tax cut, it would filter down or trickle down to middle class Americans, either by seeing increased capital investment in businesses or increased hiring for businesses. But we got a report last week saying neither of those things have happened. And then there's the just kind of vague, we're all better off when rich people and corporations have more money, which I don't even think really warrants refuting at this point because we're so past beyond that absolute and total nonsense. But most notable is, are people getting tax refunds or not in 2018? And the reality is that there are now more and more Trump voters tweeting, what happened to my tax refund? Now, I'm going to break down whether the refund in and of itself actually tells us what we need to know about the tax cut plan. Hint, it doesn't. But as some examples we've seen, let's look at some tweets from Trump voters who are very, very angry about how they're actually being impacted by Donald Trump's tax plan. The first of which is April Henderson saying, we're paying $5,000 more in taxes for 2018. Imagine our surprise. We voted for you, Donald Trump. We have advocated for you. I have lost lifelong friends in support of you. I am truly disappointed. Not only have our taxes increased, but you've done nothing to fix our health care. Another tweet. Just got my tax returns completed for the first time under the new tax law. I'm officially paying more in taxes so rich people can pay less. You're almost done wiping out the middle class. Donald Trump and Republicans, this one is on you. I'd vote for Hillary before I voted for you again. One other example. Donald Trump, I trusted and voted for you. Now screwed by you. I fall just above a tax bracket. I don't get the $5,000 return I've gotten the last 3 years. Money my family depends on to start us over. I served my country honorably. I will not make the same mistake twice. Very angry. Doesn't appear to understand how marginal tax rates work, but okay. And then lastly, Donald Trump just did my taxes and thanks for increasing mine. No change in income and got back $400 less than last year. That campaign promise was one of the only two reasons I voted for you. Rethinking that decision now. So let's first remember that a lot of these people are angry, but they don't necessarily understand how taxes work. So it's really, really important. I want to give everybody all the information that they need to figure this out. The first thing to understand is that your tax refund doesn't tell you whether your taxes went up or down. Some people expected tax cuts. Some people got them. Some people didn't get them. But some people just aren't realizing that the refund amount doesn't actually tell you whether you paid more or less in taxes, because there's a difference between taxes withheld and taxes actually owed. You could have 2 years in a row where you pay $10,000 in taxes. Imagine that in the first year, during the year, you have $12,000 withheld. Turns out you only owe $10,000 in taxes. So when you file your taxes, you get $2,000 back. Great. The next year, you might owe $10,000, but you only had $9,000 withheld. So when you do your taxes, you have to cut a check for $1,000. In both cases, you paid $10,000 in taxes. The difference being in the first year, you over withheld. In the second year, you under withheld. So changes were made by the tax law to withholdings. And the idea was to make the withholdings closer to people's actual effective tax rates. So you reduce your withholding during the year, you get a smaller refund at the end, but that doesn't actually change the amount of tax due. So that's number one. Some people just clearly don't get it, that your refund doesn't tell you whether you owe more or less in taxes in total. But then let's get to some of the reasons why people may actually have had an increase in the 2018 tax year to the amount of tax that's due. Number one, there is now a limit of $10,000 to what's called the SALT deduction. The SALT deduction tells you how much income, how much money rather, can you deduct in state and local taxes and real estate taxes. That limit is now $10,000. So imagine that you earn $75,000 in Massachusetts, which has a 5.3% income tax. That's $3,950 in Massachusetts income tax that you pay. That eats up about 40% of your $10,000 SALT deduction. If you have a property where your property taxes are, for example, $7,000, you're only going to be able to deduct $6,000 of those $7,000 because you will hit that $10,000 SALT deduction. There are lots of people who are seeing a slight increase to their taxes paid because of that limit to the SALT deduction. Another issue, the personal exemption of $4,000 per dependent was eliminated. There are people who will end up paying more in taxes as a result of that. There are some limits to how much mortgage interest you can deduct, although that really only impacts very big mortgages that likely wouldn't be held by lower and middle income individuals. But what's incredible about all of this is that, like with most tax plans, some people pay a little more, some people pay a little less in the middle class. But the people that are really benefiting are the very wealthy people who are saving a median of $60,000 in taxes. There are very rich people who are saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes or even millions of dollars in taxes. And so when you zoom out, the big picture is you've got middle income Americans tweeting to Trump about $500 one way or the other, not to belittle the importance of $500 to middle income Americans. But what is going completely ignored by a lot of people is that there is one class that very, very much benefits from this, and it is the very rich who had gigantic tax cuts. Again, one group getting an average cut of $60,000. This is the red herring. This is how they win. And the only question is, will they hold him accountable in 2020? Because all of a sudden they'll get back to Hispanic people are dangerous and we need Bible study in school. Let's vote Trump and forget about the fact that he promised a tax cut and maybe I didn't get one. So a combination of misunderstanding how a lot of these tax cuts, provisions work, combined with cognitive dissonance and a short political memory, may make it so that Donald Trump still gets reelected in 2020. We've been covering the topic of Donald Trump's involvement with Russia for a long time. I don't think I have to rehash the entire thing for you, but we've heard countless denials from Donald Trump about connections to Russia. We have heard denials from Donald Trump about discussing deals with Russia in any serious manner. He went there for his beauty pageant, and that's really about it. That Moscow Trump Tower project years ago wasn't serious, and Donald Trump was barely involved in it whatsoever. That's the storyline that we've heard from Donald Trump, but it continues to get worse and worse, and more apparent lying is being exposed. And we now have two previously unreported data points, we can call them, that contradict Donald Trump's claims. First, we have a video that has been released, which claims to be of Donald Trump, and I think there's no question that it is Donald Trump. It claims to be a meeting in Russia with the deputy mayor of Moscow, Vladimir Rezin, in 1995 about a building project. And again, this was allegedly in 1995. If that's true, this is a previously unreported attempt to make a deal to do business with Russia. And it is one of the many that now are on the list that supposedly didn't exist. That's number one. And the accuracy of the description of that video as being from 1995 in Moscow is being investigated, but that certainly does appear to be Donald Trump there. And the language track, by the way, if you listen to it, is Russian. There's also additional new claims published in Newsweek yesterday that Donald Trump was in talks with Russians to build an underground mall in Moscow in the 1990s. It would have been close to the State Duma, which is the lower house of Russia's Federal Assembly. So, of course, that's not a crime, but let's go back to the story that we've been told. And we're going to talk about this later today with Molly Mckew. Trump claims nothing with Russia. No deals, barely been there, doesn't deal with Russians, nothing, nothing, nothing. And then, of course, we learned the reality. He went in 1987. A report says he was looking at an underground mall in the 90s. He's on video, purportedly in 1995, looking at another project. He worked on the Trump Tower Moscow deal way more than he admitted. There were plans for the building, which were now released, and that was all happening during the 2016 presidential campaign. So we have a serial liar about this specific issue. We're not hearing Trump deny that he's done business in Chile, and then we find out here's 5 instances of Trump trying to do business in Chile. It's not happening with Madagascar. It's not happening with any other country. It's happening with Russia. And Trump's denials have been numerous. Trump said in July of 2016, I have nothing to do with Russia. I'm all over the world, but we're not involved in Russia. Well, he was involved at the time. He was investigating at the time. Trump Tower Moscow, plans, schematics, designs. A builder had been identified. In October of 2016, during the second presidential debate, Hillary said Russia's trying to help elect Trump. And Trump said that it's ridiculous and that he knows nothing about Russia and doesn't deal there. There are 6, 8, 10, 12 of these denials, even early on, and they were all lies. And every time that a new story comes out, it's downplayed. Well, okay, fine. There was something, but these were low-level conversations. It wasn't serious. It wasn't secret. It wasn't Trump himself who was involved. And every single time we find out that that wasn't the truth. We found out it wasn't the truth with Moscow Trump Tower. We found out that it wasn't the truth because here's a video, allegedly, of a meeting that was never reported, never disclosed. Remember when lying mattered? Remember when Trump called for the end to the investigation into his wrongdoing during a State of the Union speech 2 nights ago? We now have 2 more reasons why we can't let the investigations be short-circuited by Trump, because we are only at the tip of the iceberg as to what has gone on. And later on in the program, Molly Mckew is going to talk to us about it in a lot of depth. Give me your take on this video. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Recording.
Let me say thanks to today's new member of the day, Christian Huffy. Christian is a really great guy because he signed up for membership at www.joinpakman.com. You may not be aware of membership because it's just not a topic that I delve into very often on the program, but we are mostly funded by individual members who sign up on our website. Also want to say thanks to Roy Lopez. Roy has been with us for almost 5 years, more than a presidential term worth of membership for Roy. Christian and Roy, thank you. Join them at www.joinpakman.com. And you can, of course, use the coupon code This is 2020. I got 2 coupon codes mixed up there. This is 2020 will save you 40%. We are approaching 10,000 subscribers to our subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit, where political discussions of all kinds are happening every single day. I want to point to a couple of interesting posts on the David Pakman Show subreddit that I saw this morning. One relates to a correction that we had to issue on the program related to nuclear Montenegro, a viewer pointing out that I mentioned on the Monday show that Montenegro has 100 nuclear warheads, and indeed they do not. And I was completely owned after that show by both facts and common sense. The facts are Montenegro doesn't have 100 nuclear warheads. Common sense also dictates that Montenegro doesn't have 100 nuclear warheads. And we've gone back. We've done a very, very thorough investigation. And I have absolutely no idea where that came from. And it's a mistake that I did apologize for on the program. Self-owned, I think, is the best way to put it. Also, a discussion from the David Pakman Show subreddit, which points out that Joe Rogan played my recent video about Alex Jones, where Alex Jones floated this conspiracy theory about people eating the pituitary glands of young kids because they have a hallucinogenic effect or something like that. Yes, I saw that Joe Rogan played the clip, and Joe Rogan has mentioned the David Pakman Show a couple of times now, which is very, very cool. And I'm actually going to dig in more detail later to the continued just bizarre behavior from Alex Jones. And in fact, Joe Rogan, a podcaster, Joe Rogan is now kind of a player in this entire thing because of how he seems to have triggered Alex Jones. So anyway, we'll get to more of that later on in the program. Join the discussion. It costs nothing. It's very rewarding at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Ever since we learned that House Democrats would be taking over control of the House of Representatives with a majority after the 2018 midterm elections, we've been trying to sort of figure out, well, what are their priorities going to be? What should their priorities be? What are they going to be investigating? And what sort of decisions are they going to make about obstructive attempts that Republicans, when in control of the House, made? One such attempt is the fact that the House Intelligence Committee, when still controlled by Republicans before early January, when Democrats were sworn in and took control of the House of Representatives, the House Intel Committee, run by Republican Devin Nunes, did everything they could to avoid sending transcripts of a number of witness testimonies over to Robert Mueller and over to the Justice Department for analysis and to become possibly part of future indictments. There are more than 70 such interviews that the House Intelligence Committee did. These include Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner. And it's possible that these are sort of the last pieces of the puzzle that investigators would need in order to actually process some indictments. So, for example, with Roger Stone, we know that Robert Mueller generally knew the content of Roger Stone's testimony for a while. But in late December, or mid to late December, I think between the 15th and 20th of December, Mueller and his team received the official Roger Stone transcripts. And about four to 5 weeks later, Roger Stone was, of course, arrested and indicted. So it's possible that Robert Mueller already has a pretty good grasp and handle on what it is that Donald Trump Jr. and others said in their testimonies, and is waiting on the official transcripts in order to make the determination that it's time to process indictments. It's possible that they won't. What we do know is that Donald Trump Jr. had privately been telling friends that he does expect that he is going to be indicted by Robert Mueller at some point. So this is a really, really big deal. The question of, will the House Intelligence Committee, now controlled by Democrat Adam Schiff rather than by Trump crony Devin Nunes, will they make a decision to get these transcripts over to Robert Mueller? So what happened yesterday? The House voted, and they voted yes. The House is sending transcripts from more than 50 witnesses to Robert Mueller and to investigators. Additionally, it's important to remember that when this same Intelligence Committee was controlled by the Republican Party up until before early January, they stalled on delivering these transcripts, which may have stalled indictments from happening. That's not happening anymore. So whose testimony is being sent over? We don't actually know. We presume that Donald Trump Jr.'s testimony and Jared Kushner's testimony are being sent over. It's important also to remember that this goes not just to Robert Mueller, but it also goes to the Department of Justice. And these transcripts can be used for all ongoing investigations. Will the public ever see these transcripts? We don't know. Adam Schiff is the new chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and he said that he is going to review whether they are ultimately going to release any of these transcripts publicly. But the most important takeaway here is that things have been sort of quiet recently in terms of indictments, other than obviously that major indictment of Trump inner circle strategist Roger Stone. We could be sort of overdue for indictments, and whether it's Donald Trump Jr. or someone else, it could trigger Trump to lash out in ways we haven't seen thus far. I got a few emails suggesting that Jared Kushner is going to be next to be indicted. I highly doubt that. A couple people emailed me and said Ivanka is next. I don't even know that that's on the table at this point. But Donald Trump Jr. is the name that we keep going back to. And I can only imagine that Donald Trump is going to be very, very triggered if his son gets indicted. I'm guessing he wouldn't be able to pull he was barely involved. He's not an inner circle member. He was just acting on his own. I don't know anything he was doing. It's his son, after all. I don't think Trump will be able to defend himself in that way, but we'll see. Maybe he'll disown Don Jr. in an effort to preserve himself. I don't know. Unfortunately, there are lots of people that are still ignoring the seriousness of these transcripts being sent over. There have been indictments already for people for lying to Congress. And if Don Jr. did it and got indicted, it's possible he would have to go to prison. I mean, this is just not a joke at all. And the idea that there's a lot of people laughing off these transcripts as irrelevant, maybe nothing will come of it. But I don't know that Donald Trump Jr. is willing to take that risk, especially when he said he anticipates that he may indeed be indicted, according to reports about what he's been telling his friends. How long might it take once the transcripts get to Robert Mueller? It could be a while. As one data point, I believe it was right around the middle to the 20th or so of December when the official Roger Stone transcripts were sent over to Robert Mueller. And it took a little over 4 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks for the Stone indictment to happen. So it could be 30 to 40 days, even if there is an indictment planned of Donald Trump Jr. Before we actually see it. But if there is any takeaway from this, you can tell that we're now getting sort of into the 2020 election, because the takeaway from just about every story on the David Pakman Show now is this may make no difference at all to Trumpists, and we need to vote in 2020. The 2018 midterms were not 100% what we wanted, but as a result of Democrats taking over the House and thus the House Intelligence Committee, there are actually some things starting to happen. Later in the program, I'm going to tell you about a very big new House investigation into foreign influence on Donald Trump and on possible financial crimes by Donald Trump. So if you look back at the 2018 midterms and you say, it wasn't enough, I wish more had happened, I'm right there with you. But the results in the House were very good, and it's leading to some tangible results, including these investigations, including these transcripts finally getting over to Robert Mueller, which we've been waiting for a very, very long time. Make sure you're following me on Instagram, by the way. I posted a picture of a cat 2 days ago. That's it. I mean, it's just a picture of a cat. I don't know what else to tell you, but people seem to like cat pictures online. And I posted one, and you can see it on my Instagram page at david.pakman. Make sure to also follow the David Pakman Show on Instagram. Polls, top comments, all sorts of great stuff on the David Pakman Show Instagram page at David Pakman Show. We will take a very, very brief break. It'll be over before you know it. And Molly Mckew joins me next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program today Molly Mckew, who is a foreign policy and strategy consultant, also an information warfare expert, and someone who's been tracking the comings and goings of not just Robert Mueller's investigation into Trump Russia, but a lot of the other things that have been going on, including recent news that the House Intel Committee is indeed sending a whole bunch of transcripts over to Mueller and New York prosecutors. Molly, let's just kind of take a 30,000-foot view to begin with. You have those, including the acting attorney general, who are saying this thing is almost over. You have others who are saying this could still go on for potentially years. It's unlikely that the raid on Roger Stone's house is the last chapter in this entire thing. That signals that there's much more to come. How should we be sort of thinking about, number one, where we are in this process, and then number two, how the different investigations overlap, if they do?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think the key thing is that the Mueller piece is kind of the center of a lot of different spokes coming out of a wheel. And I think, the original mandate was very much focused on what did Russia do to interfere in the U.S. elections. And I think he has tried to stay true to that while also sort of sending off pieces of things that he's discovered in the context of reviewing Russian activities. So you see these other investigations in the Southern District of New York and other places. There was just an indictment yesterday in South Dakota against one of the individuals kind of connected to all of this. So I think it's sort of the Mueller piece is going to be the middle, but there will be sort of cascading pieces coming out of it for some time, including the investigations in New York that will be relating to foreign agent activities and the Trump family and their finances more specifically. And then I think these congressional investigations, I think the Senate side feels pretty good about where they ended last year, that they focused a lot on kind of the information aspect of Russian influence online and social media. The House side is sort of starting a bunch of new investigations relating more to the Trump family finances, potential foreign influence beyond Russia into the family. And then a lot of other questions that they feel are unanswered lines of approach on the Russia investigation. So I think there is this kind of initial core that was hopefully what eventually is known from Mueller is here's some answers to some questions about Russia, but there's probably going to be a lot of other questions connected to that. And I think none of this will be done anytime soon, but we need to go through, I think, every different aspect of that to understand what happened in 2016, prevented from happening again, and really look more deeply at issues of foreign influence and corruption in our own political system.
So let's talk a little bit about the Southern District of New York component, and then I have a bunch of other stuff to ask you about. So when the BuzzFeed news story came out asserting that we had finally testimony in the hands of Robert Mueller from Michael Cohen claiming specific actions were directed by Donald Trump, there was a sort of clarification or a statement put out by a spokesperson for Robert Mueller that was pretty narrowly worded, and it said that some of the characterizations in the article about testimony given to the special counsel are not actually in the possession of the special counsel. And one of the interpretations was everything in the story could be accurate except that it was given to the Southern District of New York and not to the special counsel. Is that a possibility, number one? And then just more generally, what is the Southern District of New York? What is their role in the context of all of this?
Sure. I think a couple of things there. I think the statement from the special counsel's office was very specifically worded for very ambiguous purposes. I think the statement came at a very specific time, which was because of that story. There were calls from the Hill saying, wait a minute, if you have this, we need this, because this indicates that this is much more serious than what we thought. We need to be acting on this immediately. And I think the special counsel's office really wanted to interject in there to sort of remove themselves from the political process, to dial down this sort of mob atmosphere that was being generated from the other side. But it did not, in fact, refute, the sort of substance of that, depending on how you interpret the statement. And I think nobody really knows. I think BuzzFeed has gone back and been sort of very careful about verifying the information. They just published a huge document dump on sort of the Trump organization this week, sort of showing they have a lot of material that nobody has seen. So I think you'll see a lot more of this going forward. But I think what we've seen from journalistic outlets but the very few leaks from the special counsel's office that have been not responded to or interpreted as accurate, as we've seen indictments go forward, there's a lot of material at the core of this, and a lot of different parts coming off. And I think you keep hearing commentators on the news and whatever else say, well, we're still waiting for that smoking gun. And the truth is, this whole thing is a smoking gun. I mean, never in the history of our country would you have looked at a campaign and seen, in any direction you turn, Russian money, Russian influence, people trying to make contacts with Russians, Russians trying to make contact with people, different elements of financial influence going through outside organizations with connections to Russia, working hard to influence the Trump campaign or provide avenues of communications, promising to deliver on different aspects of sort of policy changes. All of this is absolutely horrific. And it has been this annoying drip, drip, drip. I hate that phrase, but thus it is, over the last few years. But the body of this is indicative of a systemic problem relating to this campaign and the people involved in it. It could just be because many of them have their own ethical and corruption-related issues that will probably come out over time. We've seen some of that in the beginning of this cabinet, the number of people that have been challenged on ethical issues. Many of them are extremely wealthy and have connections to Russian businesses before, whatever. But I think it's more than that. And I think you see this sort of building up, that there was a systemic and sort of very systematic effort from the Russians to find avenues of influence in the United States to achieve very specific political objectives and strategic goals. And it just so happened that there were many open doors when they started pushing on them around the Trump organization and the Trump campaign. So I think more of that will come out, and and none of it is going to be very pretty. But I think the sort of collective body of all of that is already very, very damning.
So one of the talking points, so if there's sort of like a spectrum of opinion as on this entire thing, there's people who say there's literally just nothing here at all, the witch hunt sort of crowd. On the other side, you have people who are waiting for Trump to be forcefully removed from office in some way as a result of what comes from this investigation. There's a specific sliver in there, though, that says that, okay, there has been wrongdoing turned up by this investigation, but none of it relates directly to Donald Trump and to Donald Trump's campaign, that it's stuff that people around him did before, or it's things that haven't been specifically tied to Trump himself. What is the truth of that as a general claim?
So I think as a sort of very general claim, you can say, well, none of this is Trump himself yet. But I think that is not, I mean, even from the details in the current indictments, the implication is that that's not true, that he's connected to many of these activities, certainly on the business side of looking at the attempts to make business deals with Russia. He was engaged in those activities. He knew about them. He knew what was going on. He was making statements in direct connection to the efforts to achieve a business deal with Russia during his campaign. I think on his side, there seems to be already, and from some of his lawyers who are not cartoons, there seems to be this effort to lay the groundwork to be able to say he didn't know about any of this. This was all volunteerism on the part of the people around him, including his own children. And this guy was just running for office, and what he said himself, which was, well, I thought I was going to lose. So, why shouldn't I try to make money while I'm campaigning for president, knowing that I'm not going to win? Now, even that is an incredibly ridiculous statement in terms of the ethics of public office and seeking public office and the corruption that he is himself implying he is engaged in. But that will be, I think, a core lane of effort that they will try to use to convince people that he has nothing to do with this. I don't ultimately think that will be successful, because what we have seen in every one of the indictments from Mueller and his team so far is there is an incredible amount of data backing what they do. It's not he said, she said. It's not some guy over here gave us an interview. It's intercept material. It is communications, emails, phone calls, text messages, documented, corroborated interactions indicating a real effort to try to influence the Trump campaign, and the Trump campaign responding to some of those entreaties. Now, I think it's important to remain focused on the fact that the Mueller piece is supposed to be the Russia aspect of this, and we've seen some of it already, and that sort of hard, quote, collusion piece, is there an email between Roger Stone and someone in Russia saying, haha, we know what we're doing? I don't know that that's ever going to be what comes out, but I think that there's I think there's a willingness to engage in these activities on the part of the people who have been indicted from the Trump team so far, including his campaign manager, his other campaign manager, other people that were acting as his advisors, his lawyers, others. It's just impossible for the president to say at some point, I didn't know anything about any of this. He is known to be a micromanager. He is known to be a guy super engaged in his own organizational structures. He has never had a big structure around him. It's always him and a few very close acolytes and his children. And he's not a guy who isn't aware of all of that. And I think that will eventually be what damns him on this.
When it comes to the storyline that, I mean, there's sort of a bunch of different claims that are being made around this, but the storyline generally that you can actually trace Trump's connection to Russia back a long time. So whether it's the video released purporting to be from 1995 of Trump in Russia having a meeting, or whether it's the 1987 trip, or the idea that maybe this goes through Melania, given that she's from Slovenia, there may be surreptitious connections there. Whichever version of that you want to focus in on, or all of it in general, is that, do you think, a good path to be going down, or should the focus really be more the specifics of what can be proven related to the campaign?
I think the focus for the intention, or for the purposes of the Mueller investigation, should very much be that latter piece. It should be what was happening between 2014 and 2017. It looks like they've been investigating some things after he was sworn into office as well. So sort of anything since he became focused on running for president in the mid 2010s, I think should be fair game. Before that, I mean, a lot of it is context that's helpful. I think the piece of this that I think is often ignored is, yes, there were contacts between Trump and the Soviet Union, various Soviet individuals in New York when he went to the Soviet Union to visit, and then ongoing via his first wife, Ivana, whose father was sort of reporting on him as an up-and-coming businessman to local intelligence operatives back in the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia at the time. There's a lot of different lines of this, but I think if you look at the early 90s, there was sort of a core ideological concept for the Kremlin of, okay, how do we rebuild all of this influence that we've lost in the world since the collapse of the Soviet Union? It wasn't just the loss of territory, it was the loss of sort of greatness, of being a big force at the table, of being able to have access to everything in different groups. And they really made an effort to gain access to cultural elites, especially business and financial elites around the world, to find these places where the resources they had, particularly in the business and financial world, could gain them access back to decision makers and policymakers. And that's always been a long line of effort. They don't make friends with a guy in New York and say, okay, we're going to make you president in 30 years. They make friends with people in New York knowing that most of those people will just sort of continue on, but maybe 3 or 4 of those end up in positions that are potentially useful over time. I think Trump was very much on that list. He was bombastic. If the sort of recruitment and influence acronym is MICE, money, ideology, compromat, and ego. I think in every aspect of that, there's a way to influence Trump in different ways. I think they knew that over time. But I think that it was, initially, I do believe it was this is somebody that could potentially be useful, and that probably evolved into something else later on. But what that tipping point was, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and we may not exactly find out what that tipping point was. We've been speaking with Molly Mckew, foreign policy and strategy consultant, also an expert on information warfare. Molly, great as always to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So to continue our conversation of really a number of different issues. Number one, what will Democrats in the House do now that they've taken over control of the House of Representatives? Number two, in what other ways will this kind of circle of criminality or storm cloud of criminality drench Donald Trump with more rain. In all of these different ways, there has been the question of what is going to happen with the House Intelligence Committee investigation from the Republican era, which ended, number one, of course, run by Devin Nunes, who was running to Trump to tell him what they were working on, and number two, ended prematurely before even all of the relevant witnesses had been interviewed, as far as what Democrats on that committee told us. What is going to happen in that committee with regard to investigating Donald Trump? You'll remember that on Tuesday night at his 1 week delayed State of the Union address, Donald Trump called for an end to investigations into him. Well, they're not ending. And in fact, the opposite is happening. There are new investigations starting into Donald Trump, including by the House Intelligence Committee. We've heard from the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, that a very, very significant new investigation is starting into Donald Trump's finances and into foreign influence on Donald Trump. Now, if you're hearing that and saying another Russia probe, it seems that there's so much more to look into beyond just the Russia-Trump stuff, and you would be absolutely and completely correct. This is a much broader investigation because we've learned that the foreign influence on Trump is not just Russia, but Saudi Arabia is increasingly a point of interest. There are other countries that are points of interest because we've learned that Donald Trump's financial crimes may go well beyond just money laundering for Russian oligarchs through New York City real estate. There's so much more to look into that the new House Intelligence Committee investigation is going to look into anything that is related to possible financial wrongdoing by Donald Trump and anything else that could be influencing the way that Donald Trump makes decisions as president of the United States. This could be Russians, Saudis, anybody else. And it's not just going to be the House Intelligence Committee. This is an investigation that is so massive that it is going to include other committees as well. So the good news here is that if the Mueller investigation were to end tomorrow with no more indictments, it's still not the end. Now, I don't think that that's likely. Molly Mckew, who we just spoke to, doesn't think that that's particularly likely. But even if Matthew Whitaker somehow came up with a way to end the Mueller probe tomorrow or whatever else took place that ended it, it still is not going to be the end because the House Intelligence Committee is just getting started. Donald Trump was asked about this new probe. He didn't really say anything about it other than attacking Adam Schiff. He said Adam Schiff, who runs the House Intel Committee now, said, quote, is a political hack trying to build a name for himself. Interpret that however you want. I was thinking how Trump ran on this talking point of draining the swamp. There is a way that Trump may actually succeed in draining the swamp, which he promised to do. It would be having so many people around him that are part of the swamp that committed criminal acts that they end up resigning in shame or in prison because of the investigations that have been triggered by the Trump presidency. That's the only way that Trump is actually going to drain the swamp. And an interesting question for me is whether Devin Nunes could be caught up in all of this. You'll remember he was the previous chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, which of course was transparently bogus to begin with. Nunes had been on Trump's transition team, and then he was put in charge of the House committee that was investigating wrongdoing by Donald Trump. So we knew from the beginning that that was not an investigation that was going to come up with anything substantive, and indeed it ended before all relevant witnesses could even be interviewed. He could potentially be pulled into this investigation at this point. And Trump's mistake in retrospect may end up being having won the election, because I don't think he expected to win from the beginning. I believe that he wanted to place a sort of respectable second or third in the Republican primary, make more money from his presence on reality shows, become a more in-demand and kind of well-known guy. And Trump made the brutal mistake of overestimating the intelligence of the voting public. He likely assumed they're never going to elect me. I'm not at risk of actually becoming president here. And then once he was in too deep, his ego, his well-known ego, didn't let him drop out of the election. And that's ultimately why we are in the middle of all of this. If you are someone operating on the fringes of the law, the way Donald Trump has been doing for so long, sort of the last thing you want is to end up president where everything that you're doing is going to end up under this degree of scrutiny. And if I think forward to possible documentaries about the Trump presidency, what happened Tuesday night, Trump using the State of the Union to call for an end to investigations into him, that may end up being the climax of some really interesting documentary at some point in the future. So on Monday, I talked about conspiracy theorist Alex Jones and how he really seems to be sort of just not doing well psychologically, doesn't look good for whatever standards you want to apply to Alex Jones. And to sort of like refresh your memory, I met Alex Jones in person years ago at a talk radio conference, and my reaction to meeting him was that his on-air persona is a character. He seemed to sort of recognize the wacky nature of that character and to turn it off when he's just having kind of normal conversations with people. So for years, I thought Alex Jones was a character. Then I interviewed his ex-wife, or his then soon-to-be ex-wife. I don't know if they're estranged or separated or divorced or what's going on. Anyway, she said it's not a character, and it's increasingly clear to me that it's probably not a character that Alex Jones plays. Most recently, he was kicked off a bunch of platforms for violating terms and conditions. This includes YouTube and Facebook, I believe Spotify, iTunes kicked him off, all sorts of places, kicking Alex Jones off, deciding that the content violates their terms and conditions. Okay, so Monday or late last week, I did a story about how Jones truly seems to have had some kind of a psychological incident, some kind of a deterioration in his mental state. I don't know exactly what you want to call it, but he's put on a serious amount of weight. His demeanor has become even stranger. He's proposing even more bizarre conspiracy theories about the eating of human pituitary glands as hallucinogenic, sort of like magic mushrooms. Something seems to be very, very wrong, and I discussed this. And a few days after that, podcaster and comedian Joe Rogan mentioned that I had talked about that on my program, on his program, and he pointed out that, yeah, something seems to be really wrong with Alex Jones, but Joe clarified that he doesn't hate Alex Jones. If he ran into him in person, he would give him a hug, but that something does seem to be wrong with Alex Jones, which is a perfectly reasonable commentary. Alex Jones has now declared war on Joe Rogan, and as usual, with Alex Jones, it's hard to tell what the line is between attention trolling and reality. It's hard to tell what the line is between Alex Jones, the character, and Alex Jones, the actual person. But he's promoting the fact that he's doing this on his conspiracy website, InfoWars, where he has a headline, Alex Jones declares war against Joe Rogan. He did a very long video about this. I'm just going to play like one section for you. But Jones goes on to say that Joe Rogan isn't his friend, that he's not ever talking to him again, that he's going to destroy him, all sorts of other stuff. Take a look.
The video Joe Rogan put out, I couldn't even watch all of it, but we're going to play it coming up together. Like he talks to people like they're children, like all his prey. Like he talks to me like I'm one of his prey. And like, oh, if I saw you here, you're still my friend. Just stop what you're doing, Alex. And all the rest of this crap. This is gold-plated BS when we play it. Joe Rogan literally does all these Soros talking points from Soros organizations. He cites Soros organizations and then says, I'm a liar. No, I'm not a liar. So you can run. You can run. But you can't get away for your date with Destiny JoJo. Joe Rogan, metaphysically, is a Christmas hog. And I'm going to politically haul him up by his back legs and slit his throat. His blood will fill buckets politically, not violently.
So this goes on.
Get ready, Joe.
For like 30 minutes. I'm not going to subject you to the entire thing, but here's just like one other moment from it.
All of it. Every bit of it. Everything. Because you're their darling. I figured it out. You're their baby cake. You're their model for the future. You're who they think will be on the internet when no one else is some guru to everyone. And it's just not going to happen. I'm built for war, Joe. Yeah, I don't act like a tough guy all day. I do the war. You understand? So the threats don't matter to me.
So clearly Alex Jones isn't well, and I mean, I get it. His business has sort of imploded under him, or a big part of it has. This isn't about feeling bad for Alex Jones per se. He's spread so much misinformation and conspiracy nonsense that really has damaged people. It's also not about agreeing with everything Joe Rogan says or does. I mean, I know a lot of my audience doesn't agree with Joe, and that's fine. I don't agree with everything that Joe Rogan says and does, and there's lots of topics we could talk about with Joe Rogan. But Joe Rogan responded in a completely sort of reasonable, calm, sober, adult manner. And this is very, very marginal behavior. And it's kind of a new pattern for Alex Jones because he's making specific threats to individuals, and that's not usually his pattern from what I've seen and observed. And now I'm kind of remembering, I think that at some point Joe Rogan had said he also believes Alex Jones is playing a character, which I believed for a while. I've been disabused of that notion. I don't think that Alex Jones is playing a character, at least not at this point. I wonder whether Joe Rogan has also changed his mind about it after seeing what it is that's going on here. If you're Joe Rogan, do you take these as serious threats? Like, what is it that Alex Jones is capable of? Or do you merely write them off as kind of empty threats to get attention, particularly because it's been so hard for the InfoWars business to continue and sustain itself after Alex Jones lost all of those platforms? I don't know the answer, but it's abundantly clear that something here is wrong with Alex Jones, but in a way that goes beyond just being comfortable as a sort of propagandist of conspiracy theories. This now is getting into personal threats. This now is getting into something that we even hadn't seen before. Very, very strange, and I'd be curious to see what you think about it. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call any time of day. Here is a call I got about a double standard that a viewer has identified. Let's take a listen to it.
Hey, David, why is it that when there's two FBI agents who exchange text messages with each other that reveal they might be anti-Trump, they have an anti-Trump bias, they immediately get fired, right? But whenever the current Attorney General, who is the boss of Robert Mueller, has, as a private citizen, made comments where he would intentionally obstruct justice, that doesn't matter. Why is that? What's going on there, like the double standard? Just a thought.
Yeah, this is a great question. You are referring, of course, to Peter Strzok, who was involved in some anti-Trump text messages. He was involved in Robert Mueller's investigative team. As soon as it came to light that that took place, he was removed, even though there was not actually evidence that his personal politics influenced how he carried out that investigation in any way, but Trumpists were calling for his head. Meanwhile, Jeff Sessions is pushed out because he's recused on the Russia investigation. In comes Matthew Whitaker, whose public statements in both audiovisual form and in writing, in op-eds, about the Mueller investigation have been made clear. He thinks it's an overreach. He thinks it shouldn't be going on, and he actually has ideas as to exactly how he would try to stop it. That all comes out, and we say, logically, this guy really shouldn't be the supervisor of that investigation. And the Trumpists and Whitaker himself say, well, listen, I made those comments when I was merely a public person, when I was merely a private citizen, rather, and it doesn't influence how I am going to manage and supervise that investigation. Now, they would never accept that if the parties were reversed, and they literally did not accept it when it came to a low-level Mueller staffer in Peter Strzok, but somehow it's okay when it's Matthew Whitaker. But you know what? They don't care. Hypocrisy and double standards don't matter anymore, and that's why we've got to vote them out in 2020. There's no other way forward. They must be voted out in 2020. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Become a member, become a patron to access it. I'll speak to you then or otherwise on tomorrow's program.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.